Imagine a child gone so quietly, so completely unseen that for months, no one outside her home suspected she'd vanished. Then one day, the tragic discovery, a small plastic tote hidden behind a vacant house. Inside, the remains of an 11-year-old named Mimi. What could make this nightmare real? And how did the system fail her? This is the story of Mimi Torres-García. Her name was Jacqueline Torres-García, but everyone called her Mimi. She was 11 years old, soft-spoken, bright, and hopeful. Her story began like that of many children, complicated, but not hopeless. Mimi had been known to Connecticut's Department of Children and Families since birth. Her mother, Karla García, was once in a detention facility when Mimi was born, so the baby was placed under guardianship with relatives. The system promised oversight, and for a while, it seemed to work. Years later, the case was closed. DCF concluded that Mimi and her younger sibling were safe living with their mother and her new partner. In school, teachers described Mimi as polite, shy, and eager to learn. Her attendance was steady. Her doctors reported no major health concerns. But safety can be deceptive, and the systems built to protect children often rely on what can be seen, not what is hidden. In August 2024, Mimi's mother informed the local school district that she would begin homeschooling her daughter. That single decision effectively removed the child from the public eye. In the school's records, the withdrawal looked routine. No one outside the home realized that the decision would become the first step in an unthinkable chain of events. By late summer, the family had moved to Farmington, a quiet community roughly 15 minutes from their old neighborhood. To outsiders, they seemed ordinary: a mother, her boyfriend, her sister, and 2 young children. But within the walls of that apartment, a slow, invisible horror was taking shape. And by the time anyone suspected something was wrong, Mimi had already vanished forever. Neighbors in Farmington sometimes heard shouting through the thin apartment walls. It wasn't constant, but enough that several times they called the police. One of those calls came on December 29, 2024. Officers arrived after dark to find Karla García and her boyfriend, Jonatan Nanita, at home. The encounter seemed ordinary, cordial, even. The officers chatted with the couple, wrote down their names, and wished them a Merry Christmas before leaving. They couldn't have known that a child had already died inside that same apartment. What officers didn't see, according to later court documents, was that Mimi's small body was hidden in the basement. She had allegedly been subjected to a pattern of punishment that blurred the line between discipline and torture. Investigators would later uncover that she was forced to stand for hours, restrained with zip ties, and denied food for days. Her mother's explanations shifted in every interrogation. At first, she blamed Anita for pushing the girl down the stairs. Later, she admitted that she herself had withheld food because Mimi didn't listen. When Mimi's body stopped moving, the adults panicked, not to save her, but to conceal what they had done. For nearly a year afterward, her absence went unreported. DCF, the very agency once responsible for monitoring her welfare, didn't realize she was missing. In January 2025, months after investigators now believe Mimi had already died, DCF reopened an inquiry about another child in the same household. To verify that Mimi was safe, a caseworker scheduled a video call. During that call, someone appeared on screen, posing as Mimi. The deception worked. Officials recorded the child as alive and well. Behind that false image, the truth was unbearable. The adults had begun staying in hotels, claiming foul smells in their apartment. The odor was the body of the little girl they had already hidden away. It was October 8, 2025, when an anonymous call reached the New Britain Police Department. The caller reported suspicious activity behind an abandoned house on Clark Street. Officers arrived expecting another case of illegal dumping. What they found instead stopped them cold. Behind the house sat a plastic storage bin sealed with black trash bags and sheets. Inside were the remains of a child weighing just 26 pounds. The decomposition was advanced, but evidence suggested starvation. DNA testing confirmed the identity: Jacqueline Mimi Torres-García, the girl no one had reported missing. Detectives traced the bin back to her mother, her boyfriend, and her aunt, Jackelyn García. In interviews, Each gave conflicting accounts. The mother said she had panicked. Nanita admitted to helping move a bin. The aunt confessed she had taken photos of Mimi restrained on the floor, but claimed she was too afraid to intervene. Court filings later revealed how the girl's body had been moved twice. First in the basement of the Farmington apartment to a hotel, then finally to New Britain, where it was abandoned behind the vacant home. It was a relocation not of grief, but a concealment. Police, who had once stood in that same household wishing the family happy holidays, now look back on that body cam footage in disbelief. Everything they needed to see had been there. The nervous smiles, the half answers, the hollow calm. But no one could have guessed the horror waiting beneath the surface. As word spread, New Britain residents began leaving flowers and candles outside 80 Clark Street. The small memorial grew each day. Photos of Mimi, bright-eyed and small, stood among teddy bears and handwritten notes. The community grieved for a child they had never met, but somehow felt they had failed to protect. After the discovery, the arrests came swiftly. Karla García and Jonatan Nanita were both charged with murder with special circumstances, conspiracy to commit murder, risk of injury to a minor, intentional cruelty, and unlawful restraint. Their bonds were set at $5 million each. Nanita later faced 2 more charges: tamper with evidence and illegal disposal of a body, raising his bond by another $750,000. The aunt, Jacqueline Garcia, was charged separately with cruelty to persons, reckless endangerment, and risk of injury to a child, held on a $1 million bond. All 3 remain incarcerated, awaiting trial. Each maintained some level of denial, but the paper trail, police reports, autopsy findings, witness statements, tells a story that cannot be softened. Meanwhile, Connecticut's Office of the Child Advocate launched an independent investigation into how so many warnings were missed. Acting Child Advocate Christina Guillo announced that her office would review the family's entire history with DCF, the courts, and the school system. The purpose, she said, was accountability and prevention. The findings could lead to systemic change, better cross-agency communication, stricter oversight of homeschooling, and new procedures for verifying a child's welfare. Even former prosecutors interviewed about the case called it one of the most infuriating failures in recent memory. The question echoed in every report: how did a child vanish in plain sight? The truth was uncomfortable. Bureaucracy had become a shield. Paperwork had replaced presence. Video check-ins had replaced visits. And in the middle of it all, an 11-year-old girl lost her life unnoticed. The leaves had already turned when the people of New Britain began gathering on Clark Street. The air smelled of rain and soil, and behind the chain-link fence of a boarded-up house, a small patch of ground became a shrine. Balloons, hand-drawn hearts, candles that melted into each other, all for a child most of them had never met. Someone taped a school photo of her to the fence. An 11-year-old girl with bright brown eyes, a hesitant smile, and a world still ahead of her. Beneath the photo, a handwritten note read, "You were loved, even if they forgot to show you." Her name was Jacqueline Mimi Torres-Garcia, and what happened to her has changed the way an entire state looks at child protection. When the story first broke in October 2025, the community struggled to comprehend it. How could a little girl disappear for months, almost a year, without anyone noticing? How could she be withdrawn from school, removed from public view, and hidden in plain sight? The questions that surfaced were not only about the people who lived with her, but about the systems that were supposed to watch over her. Within days of the discovery, the Connecticut Department of Children and Families, DCF, released a public timeline of its contact with the family. It showed a relationship that stretched back more than a decade, from the day Mimi was born in 2013 while her mother was in custody, through her years in guardianship with relatives, and finally to 2022, when DCF closed the case after declaring the children safe. The final check-in, they said, had shown no visible concerns. Mimi was smiling. Her younger sibling was healthy. Her mother appeared cooperative. No one could have imagined that less than 2 years later, the same agency would be defending itself against accusations of catastrophic oversight. The paper trail that once signaled safety had become evidence of absence. After her death was confirmed, the Office of the Child Advocate, OCA, announced an in-depth review, not only of DCF's actions, but of every institution that had touched the family's life. The school system that accepted the homeschooling notice without question, the courts that approved the mother's custody years earlier, and the social service pipelines that had quietly gone dormant. Acting child advocate Christina Guillo said her team's mission was simple yet daunting: to understand what went wrong and prevent it from happening again. She explained that every tragedy like Mimi's leaves behind two layers, one personal and one systemic. The personal one devastates families and communities. The systemic one exposes cracks that must be filled before another child falls through. The review, Guillo said, would examine whether policies were followed, whether red flags were ignored, and whether existing laws were sufficient to protect vulnerable children who suddenly vanished from public systems under the label of homeschooling. The announcement brought both anger and hope. Lawmakers began calling for new legislation requiring verification of a child's welfare after withdrawal from school, periodic in-person contact by caseworkers, and more stringent identity checks during virtual interviews. The case forced a reckoning with technology, a world where a child could be declared safe through a video call, where another child could be presented on screen to stand in for someone already gone. DCF defended its staff, insisting they acted on the information they had. They emphasized that caseworkers handle enormous caseloads, sometimes dozens of families each, and that digital check-ins have become a standard tool since the pandemic. But critics argued that efficiency had overtaken empathy, that the convenience of a webcam had replaced the human instinct to look deeper. Former prosecutors called it a perfect storm of bureaucracy. Former social workers called it burnout. But for the people lighting candles on Clark Street, it was simpler. The system forgot to care. In the weeks after the arrests, a quiet momentum built across Connecticut. Teachers and parents wrote to lawmakers asking for reforms. Foster parents spoke publicly about the strain on caseworkers. Advocacy groups began pushing for what they called Mimi's Law, a proposal to mandate in-person welfare checks for any child withdrawn from public school after a history of DCF involvement. Some called for the creation of an independent database that flags at-risk children who suddenly vanish from official oversight. The criminal proceedings moved more slowly. The mother, Karla García, and her boyfriend, Jonatan Nanita, remain in jail on $5 million bonds, each facing multiple counts of murder with special circumstances, conspiracy, cruelty to a child, and unlawful restraint. Nanita's later charges of tampering with evidence and illegal disposal of a dead body added to the growing mountain of allegations. The aunt, Jacqueline Garcia, faced her own set of felony counts, accused of filming and witnessing the abuse without intervening. All three are awaiting trial, and prosecutors have indicated they may seek to have one defendant testify against the others. The legal process will be long, likely spanning years. Yet in every court filing, every evidentiary motion, one truth remains. A child died not only at the hands of her caregivers, but also within the silence of a system that lost sight of her. In press conferences, officials avoided sensationalism. They spoke of gaps in oversight, resource shortages, and policy reviews. But beneath those bureaucratic phrases, the heartbreak was tangible. The governor called the case deeply disturbing. Local police described the discovery as the kind of scene you never forget. Even hardened detectives struggle with the imagery of that small plastic bin, a child's final resting place, sealed and discarded behind a vacant home. Mimi's story has now become a symbol. Advocacy groups use her name in campaigns about child welfare reform. At schools across the state, teachers remind each other to ask questions when a student suddenly disappears from class rosters. In legislative hearings, her case is cited as the reason Connecticut must modernize its data-sharing systems. She has become more than a victim. She has become a voice that cannot be silenced again. Still, the deeper tragedy is human. Somewhere, there are early photos of Mimi, maybe from a school field trip, maybe from a birthday cake glowing with candles. In them, you can almost see the ordinary life she should have had. The quiet power of her story is that it reminds everyone what is lost when neglect goes unseen. The drawings that would have been taped to the refrigerator, the laughter that should have filled a home, the simple right of a child to grow up. Her surviving siblings are now in protective custody. Social workers say they are receiving care and stability. Extended family members have expressed grief, but also determination. They want to ensure no one else endures what Mimi did. "We can't change what happened," one relative told reporters, but we can make sure her name stands for something. And that is what this story has become, a mission to make meaning out of loss. The memorial on Clark Street remains tended. Neighbors keep replacing the candles when the rain washes them away. Each time someone passes, they slow down, even if just for a moment. Some pray, some whisper apologies. Some just stand still, as if listening for the sound of a little girl's voice that will never echo again. The power of stories like Mimi's lies not in their horror, but in what they reveal about all of us, about how easy it is to trust that someone else is watching, that the system is working, that everything must be fine. But systems are made of people, and people sometimes look away. Her death is a lesson carved in sorrow. Vigilance must be personal. Compassion must be active, and silence can kill as surely as violence. In every corner of Connecticut, from classrooms to courthouses, her name is now spoken with a kind of reverence, not out of spectacle, but remembrance. The child once forgotten has become unforgettable. Her name was Jacqueline Mimi Torres-García. She should have been 12 this year. She should have been alive to blow out her birthday candles, to start middle school, to complain about homework, to grow up. She isn't, but because of her, the state is rethinking how to keep other children safe. Because of her, new laws are being written. Because of her, families are paying closer attention. And maybe because of her, another child's voice will be heard before it's too late. Justice will come through the courts. Change will come through the people who refuse to forget. And memory, that fragile yet powerful thing, will keep her alive in the only way it can, through action. Her story ends here, but her legacy begins in the hearts of those who say her name and mean it. Mimi, a name small enough to whisper, a name heavy enough to change everything.